So the back of the worksheet's going to continue. We're going to talk about a new word though. So it says any segment, line, or plane that intersects a segment at the midpoint is called a segment bisector. So it is splitting the segment in half. Bisect means two parts. So these last four problems are going to incorporate a lot more algebra. We're still going to use midpoint for most of these, if not all. And like I said, a lot more algebra is going to be incorporated into it. And sometimes if you're not given a visual is definitely an important thing to do. So for number 5, it says find the coordinates of J if K, -1, 2, is the midpoint of JL and L is 3, -5. So you're already given the midpoint. So what I'm going to do is draw myself a little segment here. The segment we're talking about is JL, and they already tell us that the midpoint is K. We know that K is at -1, 2, and we know that L is at 3, -5. So if we know it's a midpoint, we know that it cuts it in half. But these are points that we're talking about. So if these are points, we're dealing with coordinates. So this would be the coordinate approach that we have to use. The difference, though, is we don't know J. So we are missing x1, y1. But we have x2, y2, and we have the final answer. We know what it has to equal. We know it has to equal -1, 2. So the midpoint formula says that we take the x's, we add them up. We take the y's, and we add them up, and divide both of those guys by 2. So we're going to sub in what we have. So we have x1, don't know it, stays x1. x2 is 3, divided by 2. y1, don't know. y2 is -5. And again, divided by 2. But we know that when we calculate it, if we knew what x1 and y1 are, we know that they would equal -1, 2 for a final answer. So what we're going to do is take each piece. So the x value right here, we know has to be equal to -1. So x1 plus 3 divided by 2 is -1. So we're going to multiply by 2 on both sides to get rid of these. So x1 plus 3 is equal to -2, and we're going to subtract the 3, and we get -5. So there's our x value. For the y value, we know that that final answer has to equal 2. So y1 minus 5, instead of plus minus, over 2 is equal to 2. I'm going to multiply by 2 on both sides. So I get y1 minus 5 equals 4, and add 5, and I end up with 9. So the final answer for this is saying, okay, well, what is the values at J? Well, J is x1, y1. Well, we just found those. So x1 is -5, and y1 is 9. And there's your final answer. Okay, so again, this is one of those work your way backwards type of situations. So what I would recommend is maybe pause it and try it for this next example because it follows very similar. But the first thing you always want to do, if you're not given a picture, especially in this class, is draw yourself one, because it helps. So either pause it or see how I draw the video, and maybe then you can pause it and go from there. But definitely a picture is helpful. So it says find the coordinates of G if P is the midpoint of EG. E is at -8, 6, and P is at -5, 10. So in this case, we don't know our x2, y2. That's what's missing. But we know that this is x1, y1. And again, P is the midpoint, so it's in the middle. So we're going to use the same formula from above here, and we're going to sub in what we have. So x1 is -8, x2 we don't know, divided by 2. 6 plus y2 divided by 2, and we know that that answer has to equal the midpoint, which is -5, 10. So now we're going to take our parts. So the first value has to be equal to -5. So -8 plus x2 divided by 2 equals -5. We're going to multiply by 2 on both sides. -8 plus x2 equals -10. And when we add -8, we end up with -2. For the y value, we know that that has to equal 10. So we have 6 plus y2 divided by 2 equals 10. We're going to multiply by 2 on both sides. And we end up with 14 for that value. So again, the question is asking us find the coordinates of G. Well, G was our x2 and our y2, which comes out to being -2, 14 for a final answer. Okay, so again, the picture is helpful just so that many people, when they read this, they're like, oh, I'll just plug it into the formula, but the points are not in the same location, so you have to be very careful with that. All right, for 7, it says find the measures of PQ if Q is the midpoint. So if Q is the midpoint, that means this is equal to this. It cuts it in half, which means according to this picture, we know that PQ equals QR. Well, PQ is 9y minus 2. QR is 14 plus 5y. And if we have a two-step equation here, and we start moving stuff around, we find out that our y value is equal to 4. Now the question, though, it's not asking for y, it wants to know what PQ is. So PQ is 9y minus 2, which is 9 times 4, 36, minus 2, which makes it 34. So PQ is equal to 34. All right, so that one a picture was given. This last one a picture's not given. So I would, again, encourage you to draw a picture. So it says find the value of x if C is the midpoint of AB. So here's AB. C is the midpoint. So we know it cuts it in half. So it tells us AC, so from here to here, is 4x plus 5. But AB, the whole thing, is 78. The first thing you got to ask yourself, well, if AC is 4x plus 5, then I know CB is also 4x plus 5 because it's the midpoint. It cuts it in half. So if I made a formula, the whole segment is AB. AB is made up of AC plus CB. And I fill in what I have. So AB is 78. AC is 4x plus 5. And CB is also 4x plus 5. So when I combine like terms, I get 8x plus 10. Move the 10 over. And when I divide by 8, you get a decimal, which is fine. And then you go back and double check.